Hello and welcome back to another video with me, Meoni. This time something a little different for me personally. I see a lot of people talking about their favourite games of 2018 and I thought to myself, well, why the hell haven't I made one of these? There's plenty I think deserves a mention from last year and plenty that's probably on my list that I don't really see on anyone else's. So without further ado, here's my top 7 games of 2018. The first game that sucked most of my time outside of Final Fantasy XIV has to be Dragon Quest XI, Echoes of an Elusive Age. This monster of a game provides hours and hours and hours of content, from traditional style turn-based battles to collecting items, then crafting said items into useful weapons and armor, a main storyline that keeps you entertained throughout, entertained being the main word to describe the storyline, since as much as there is a serious plot, the game never dwells on it too badly, often slipping humour and camaraderie into the mix to stir things up. So much so, half of the time I was just laughing or cringing my way through sections. The side quests are your typical fetch quests for the most part, and some of the back and forth in places might irritate millennials, but for the most part all of the accompanying content to go with the storyline never really fails to grab your attention and keep you feeling guilty if you miss something along the way, forcing you back, tail between legs, to previous areas out of sheer OCD in wanting to figure out how to get to a secret chest or find the missing dragon scale or whatever for a quest you've missed, just so your digital NPC friends meet your approval. It's a fantastic port on PC, and from what I hear, the console versions are just as good. Second on my list of soul-consuming games last year has to be Monster Hunter World. My goodness. The console versions came out January 2018 and I put hundreds of hours into my PlayStation 4 version. But then, just as I'd put down my greatsword and stepped away from Behemoth gingerly as it got incorporated, the PC version came out late August. And guess what? Back to the game I slid, this time with the promise of being able to play with my PC friends and more than 30 frames per second, which is all the PS4 can handle. And generally, it was fantastic. There were severe connection issues on launch, but considering this was the first time Monster Hunter had really been on PC like this, it was kind of going to be expected. Patches came eventually and have made it easily one of my favourite pastimes in content lulls in Final Fantasy XIV. The constant update of new monsters and challenges, arc-tempered Valhazak that obliterates me, tempered elder dragons that like to poke and prod me to death, crazy event quests pitting you against multiple enemies at a time, strange crossovers including Devil May Cry, Mega Man of all things, and of course a little crossover with Final Fantasy XIV's Behemoth. All of these content updates keep the game fresh and excruciatingly difficult in areas, yet maintain the balance between outright frustration and the one more try mentality that got me through most of the Dark Souls series. And much like Dark Souls, a series I absolutely adore, Monster Hunter gives you a massive shot of adrenaline, endorphins and ecstasy every time you accomplish something difficult, and that's why I keep coming back. Third on the list of time-consuming deliciousness is a game called X4 Foundations. This is somewhat of a nostalgia trip for me personally. I remember getting X2 The Threat from a charity shop here in the UK whilst on holiday with my family when I was much younger. And for those of you in America, I guess that's a thrift shop or a Goodwill store. Anyway, the game was pretty special when I got back from my vacation, and the first thing I actually did was put this CD into my old computer, and that was it. I was instantly hooked. X games are a massive open universe of areas connected with gates. Hundreds of ships go about their daily business as you fly around, and generally, for the most part, the game, whilst having a main storyline, just lets you do what you want. And X4 that recently came out was an incredible experience and continues to be one now and onwards as they're adding more content to it. The game sucked over 100 hours out of me in something like 3 weeks, and the only reason I stopped playing it as much was primarily waiting for that new content. The developers Egosoft are particularly vocal when it comes to discussing their games with their fans, and that's something that has to exist, especially in space games, otherwise you get another game like No Man's Sky. It's a game where I get to be a merciless scumbag with a ton of money and build my own space empire with blackjack and space hookers. Well, not so much the hookers and blackjack, more laser turrets and explosions as I rip through NPC territory with all my destroyers to gain dominance over a trade route. Fourth on the list is Spyro the Reignited Trilogy. This one, me and Rose spent hours playing and have only really recently finished completely. It's a nostalgia trip back in time to a day where I was much smaller and had little care in the world, but coming home from school as fast as I could just to play on my PlayStation 1 because school sucked so bad. The summary of the game? Well, it's basically the best thing to ever come out of Activision in several years. Instead of games slapped with microtransactions and loot boxes, this takes you back to a time where games were just games. Spyro is a collectathon god. 3 polished games with vibrant, eye-smashing graphics make the whole thing look like you imagined it to look all those years ago. Unfortunately, the games never looked this good back then, and unless you look at the original footage again of the original games, you'll very likely miss the differences, or at least that's how my mind worked. And as soon as you realise the improvements, your jaw will just fall off your face. I think Toys for Bob did an excellent job and should be really commended, and hopefully they do more remasters. Definitely a slice of pure PlayStation joy, and I'm eternally grateful it got remastered as well as it did, and it deserves to be in anyone's collection. Fifth on the list, yeah, you had to see it eventually I suppose, is Final Fantasy XV. A game for the most part I feel is quite rushed in the storyline and has missing chunks floating everywhere that never really get assembled into something legible. However, the gameplay ain't half bad. Action combat was never really my favourite direction they could have gone for with a Final Fantasy game. I'm one of those old fuzzy idiots that prefers turn-based systems like the ATB system, but I will have to say the game is pretty damn fun. From collecting things to magic usage, driving around in a car listening to old Final Fantasy music, and fighting off hunt marks, fishing for the next biggest catch, riding chocobos and raging at the difficult races with the chocobros themselves. It all smells and tastes like a Final Fantasy game, but that silver storyline wrapper just seems missing in points. Hajime Tabata's eventual departure, let's call it, from Square Enix and the $35 million losses resulted in the consequent cancellation of the remaining DLC for the game, aside from episode Arden coming later in 2019. It only comes as a sad reflection of the same issues I had with the game itself. For the most part, you could say this game is either loved unquestionably or hated overwhelmingly when you read the Steam reviews. I sit in the middle somewhere, and it tastes slightly like chocolate in areas, but sometimes you realise it's patched together with brown paint and leaves this nasty taste in your mouth wanting for more sweetness. If you can get the PC version on the cheaps with the DLC included, then you should play it, as it will consume many hours of your life, but try not to pay more than 30 quid for it. The sixth game that I enjoyed last year was Jurassic World Evolution. There's a very specific reason I enjoyed this game as much as I did, and probably more than I should have enjoyed it, to be honest. And that is another Jurassic game, the Jurassic Park Operation Genesis PlayStation 1 game. Operation Genesis was another slice of my childhood, the ability to build your own park, populate the thing with sharp-teeth Goliaths, and charge your punters extra for drinks after making your fries salty as fuck and as cheap as hell to make a quick buck. Well, Jurassic World Evolution is actually very similar. It lacks some of the more entertaining aspects of the PS1's creativity in its design, but it's an absolute barrel of laughs. You can still fail miserably and watch everyone get eaten, drive jeeps into dinosaurs and shoot at them, airlift them across the park like a deadly Tariba grabber game, and breed impurities into their DNA to make them batshit crazy. All in all, it made some of the downtime in queue waiting in Final Fantasy XIV much more bearable. And the seventh on my list has to be Kingdom Come Deliverance. This is a game that most people might just not get, and that's totally fine, but developers Warhorse Studios struck gold with me and a few of my friends with this one in particular. It's an incredible tale of a young lad who gets his life flipped upside down when a couple 100,000 guys were up to no good and started to burn and pillage his neighbourhood. His parents were both killed, his friends set alight, and ran off to Radzid Koblaya in Talmberg for refuge. In general, though, the storyline is set in 1403, during a war in the Kingdom of Bohemia. between Sigismund, the King of Hungary and Croatia, who kidnaps Charles IV of the Holy Roman Empire's son Wenceslas IV of Bohemia when Charles dies and Wenceslas proves to be a useless leader. The whole plot is revenge for the main character and takes you on a crusade of sorts through a far-reaching storyline. What starts off as a simple "I'm gonna kill you for killing my entire family" soon gets groomed by the various NPCs into "fuck Sigismund, I will fight for my country and banner." It's a great storyline, the game itself has bugs aplenty, but when people spend more money on Bethesda's games and encounter equal or worse bugs, then you can kind of let it off. It's a small studio, it's a fantastic game. If you like history, RPGs, and a brutal fighting system, then you will love Kingdom Come Deliverance. And that's pretty much the end of the games I'd like to list in this video. There are the usual top tier games that I could mention but I've enjoyed the last year. Certainly Red Dead Redemption 2 was highly entertaining and up on that list for sure, and continues to be entertaining. But for the most part, the games I've mentioned actually took the most of my free time and made my year more bearable. Let me know if you agree with any of the games I've listed and what your top 7 games were of 2018. Conversely, what you're most looking forward to this year, cough cough, Cyberpunk. Thank you kindly for watching, and I'll see you all next time.